Hello and welcome again to the Confident Birth Preparation video series. I am Charlotte Canye, Birth Confidence Coach, and today we are welcoming Sophie Jeffries from Australia, who is a Pilates instructor who has a special interest in pregnancy and mums-to-be and many other wonderful modalities supporting women postpartum as well as through the pregnancy journey. So welcome, Sophie. And
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd love to start if you could introduce yourself a little bit and say how you became passionate about supporting women becoming mothers.
Well, I have worked as a Pilates teacher for about probably about 16 years, and as a shiatsu therapist for about 10. And I had children. Well, my eldest is 8, so I had him about 8 years ago, and I was quite struck by how little preparation there was for how to help my body give birth, and also how to help it recover afterwards. I had a home birth and felt like I had put in place everything that would support me to give birth at home in a positive way. And whilst it was a home birth and it was a positive experience, I felt like I really struggled in the rehabilitation and the postnatal period because of my history of doing a lot of exercise and doing a lot of Pilates and yoga and dancing, which I later learned can often lead to women having a tight pelvic floor or a hypertonicity through the muscles of the pelvis and pelvic floor, which may or may not have led to what I felt like was a really challenging birth experience. And then I had quite severe pelvic girdle pain afterwards, and tailbone pain, which lasted for quite some time. And I guess I was really profoundly impacted by how little support there was and how no one sort of talked to me about how I could prepare my body to give birth, because the body is how the baby gets here. There was a lot of talk about, the actual birth, things I would need for the birth. I did like hypnobirthing stuff, and I did, some, sort of artwork and trying to understand my fears and my reservations and that sort of thing. Looked into diet and felt like I was looking at it from as holistic a perspective as I could, given that it was my first baby. But it was only after the birth that I realized that there's this whole world of ways that you can prepare your body to give birth. And I feel like that's really missing in prenatal care. And I still think it's missing in prenatal care even now, 8 years later. And also because I work as a Pilates teacher, I see a lot of women in the postnatal period who have ongoing problems that can be directly related to the pregnancy or the birth of their babies, and whether that's a diastasis, prolapse, leaking, so incontinence, or pelvic pain. And that those sort of conditions will often carry on for months, if not even years, after the birth of their children, and they're never really addressed. And I guess I felt like, well, prevention is better than rehab. So I became really interested in how to help women prepare their bodies for birth. And I also trained as a postpartum doula because I could see that as much as I can help women rehabilitate their bodies in the postnatal period, there's this that early first 6 weeks where actually women don't seem to know what to do to look after themselves, to really promote healing and protect the healing process, which is where some of the injuries and conditions might be stemming from, because they're sort of thinking they have to bounce back rather than take the time to rest and recuperate and allow their body to heal.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it.
Oh, wonderful. And I think it's really missing in the Western cultures, that time to heal. And I learned relatively recently, we have a 6-week check here. I don't know if you have it similar in Australia. So you essentially get very little after birth, then a 6-week check. And someone said to me, that's the remnant of the lie-in period that almost every other culture has, like a 40-day period where you don't do your normal duties. Like you mentioned 6 weeks as well, that's our remnant. So I love that you're bringing more back to that. So what kind of things do you do, and do you see that transform women during that postnatal period when you're supporting them?
In the postnatal period,
going backwards.
Well, yeah, no, that's right. I'm constantly surprised by how much women will say, "Oh, I didn't realize how much I needed to rest." So, because that's one of the things I really focus on, because really resting is really key to allowing their body to heal. And often women don't know the signs and symptoms of overexerting themselves, because our culture is so, particularly for women who become mothers, so sort of expecting that mums will bounce back and just get on with it and return to their normal duties and look after the house and look after the other kids. And if they don't have other children, often I hear stories about mothers having their in-laws or their family come over to visit the baby, and then the mum is back up making cups of tea for all her visitors and guests, when actually in reality that resting is so crucial for the healing of the body, which has been so extremely stretched and stressed through the pregnancy and the birth experience. And one of the things I really like to talk to mums about is the reason that you need to rest, particularly horizontally, so lying down, is to take the load off of the healing pelvic ligaments and the healing pelvic floor muscles. So that, because after you've given birth, the belly's stretched, and the if you've given birth vaginally, the pelvic floor is stretched, and so those muscles are really lax. So if you're standing upright for long periods of time, and then lifting maybe a toddler or lifting a heavy baby capsule, that's putting a lot of load down onto the healing pelvic ligaments and pelvic floor muscles, which can contribute to prolapse or leaking. And a prolapse is when the organs inside the pelvis fall down out of place. And it's really hard to heal. So it's much easier to prevent by resting in that postpartum period. And then there's also diet is really key for healing. So especially healing any wounds like episiotomy or cesarean or tearing. You need a really good nutrient-dense diet to help the body to heal and restore itself. And to be able to rest and to have that nutrient-dense sort of diet, you need people to support you. So I talk a lot about support and gathering your support, or your tribe, or your family and friends around you, so that they can cook for you and they can support you so that you can rest. Because if you haven't got that support, then it's impossible to rest, and it's impossible to, have the nutrient-dense food. So
yeah, that's really important. And what you spoke of, the kind of pressure to bounce back, is quite a strange notion that really shows that how we think of the body. And I think many of us, without even realizing we're doing it, are suffering from that pressure to bounce back, get back to how you were before. And you're a mother now, you're different. So
yeah,
it's like trying to do the impossible and then not valuing where you are and who you are and your body as it is. And
well,
and I think
sometimes I liken it to just an injury. If you injure your ankle, there's just a period of time where you have to take care of the ankle whilst it heals. But because the injuries or the wounds from pregnancy and birth, they're internal and you can't see them, and I feel like they're often shrouded in a bit of shame and embarrassment. So people can't see that you need to take care of yourself because you're not wearing a bandage like you might do on your ankle.
Mm-hmm.
Although you might be belly binding, but people can't necessarily see it if it's under your clothes. And so it's hard to sort of speak up and say, oh, actually, I've got some aching in my perineum, and that means I need to lie down right now. It's kind of a hard thing to say, as opposed to my ankles hurting. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lack of understanding from the wider population. If you say
Mm.
I've broken my ankle, everyone understands that. If you say my
Mm.
perineum's aching, so people, what's a perineum?
Yeah, yeah,
Why is it
exactly.
aching?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
And oftentimes I talk to mums afterwards, and in the period when I'm supporting them, so in that first 6 weeks-ish, and I say, oh, if you do ever feel that sort of aching or heaviness or dragging feeling, and some of them are like, oh, actually, yeah, I do, but they just thought it was normal after birth, which it might be normal
Mhm.
after birth, but they didn't realize that that is a sign, oh, I need to rest, actually, as opposed to it's just a little bit aching and I'll just carry on with, cooking dinner or something.
I think we're conditioned to keep going and to suffer. That
Mm.
you can do to a certain extent in an ordinary life, but after giving birth, it's a really important time for extra rest. It's an
Yeah.
undervalued job. Um,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
But I love that your classes take that approach of including
Mm.
that part of rest. How do you how does the Pilates support women's in their bodies when you're doing those kind of classes?
In the
In the
postnatal
post,
period, or
yeah, initially, and we'll work
in
backwards.
the yeah, in the postnatal period? Well, I really focus on helping women to learn how to restore their bodies in the postpartum period. So I focus on particularly helping them to just mobilize their body a little bit so that they, unwind. You know how everyone gets really tight, sore neck and shoulders from carrying a tiny baby. Often women will get sore lower backs or tight hips as well, because they might be sleeping in different positions, or they might be baby wearing a lot, which can create a lot of just tightness and discomfort. And then I'll always help women to re-establish good breathing patterns, because the diaphragm, your respiratory diaphragm, which lives, I don't think you can see me, but lives just under your lower ribs, and it coordinates with your pelvic floor. So if your diaphragm, ideally in a healthy body, if your diaphragm moves down, your pelvic floor moves down a little. And as your diaphragm comes up, your pelvic floor comes up. So it's like a piston action in a healthy body that hasn't just given birth. But after being pregnant, at the end of pregnancy, the baby grows right up under the ribs and can make the diaphragm quite tight. And so then women can't get a good breath in, and the diaphragm can't move down. So then the pelvic floor and the diaphragm can't re-coordinate.
Mhm.
So then there can be sort of this dysfunction, and that can lead to just difficulties with healing and with pelvic floor dysfunction, which might be like too tight or not strong enough or leaking, that sort of thing. But it can also just mean that then if you're tight through the diaphragm, you can be tight through the upper abdominals, which then creates pressure down. And then that can mean that, women sometimes have like a little pooch, which the mums often don't really like, but it's not necessarily that they've got a fat tummy. And I don't like using that language. I would never use that language in a class. It's just getting the muscles, so the diaphragm and the pelvic floor and the abdominals, all coordinated again so that they're balanced, as opposed to needing to lose weight or tone up. It's not really about that. My perspective is on getting the body balanced so that the core muscles can function in a really healthy way, so that you support continence and pelvic health and abdominal healing. So I'll always help women get their breathing organized, and then I'll help them to coordinate with their pelvic floor, and then coordinate with their deep abdominals, coordinate it all together so that then they can strengthen it up really safely. Because what I often find postnatally is that women might have trouble getting a good breath in, perhaps because their diaphragm's tight, so they'll breathe up here, they'll get really tight neck and shoulders. And then when they go to do something effortful, we call it in exercise loading. So they'll load their abdominals by pushing out into their abs or pushing down into their pelvic floor, which stresses those muscles in a way that is not conducive to healing and recovery and building sustainable sort of strength in their bodies. So oftentimes I spend a lot of time helping mums to repattern that and then learn how to strengthen it. And then what I really love doing is helping them to figure out how to take that into their everyday life. So a mum I was working with recently, I said to her, oh, do you sometimes think that maybe you push out into your tummy when you lift something heavy? She has a toddler, and she's like, oh yeah, all the time. Actually, that makes me feel strong. And so what you actually want for good pelvic health is the drawing in of the muscles and the lifting up of the pelvic floor. So then I was able to talk to her about, I love tea, so I often talk about tea, but so I was like, oh, do you drink tea? And she said, yeah. So I was like, well, every time you boil the kettle and you pick the kettle up, so can you try thinking about lifting the kettle slowly and feeling how, as the load or the heaviness of the kettle lifts up and it transfers through your core, you want your core drawing in rather than bracing out or bearing down. So that's just one example of how then she can build it into everyday life in one instance. And then over time, she can think about how she can do that whilst she's picking up her daughter.
I guess
so
it's
it
easier
becomes,
to do with a lighter weight as well initially when it's less effort to do it, so you've got more space free to think about what's happening. Whereas your child might take your whole effort and you're just going to do the
and so yeah, you're so right. So and if it's too heavy, then she won't be able to manage that pressure or that load, and so of course she'll bear out and like push out and bear down. So yeah, we always would start with a really light load and then build up the weight so that she sort of finds her edge point. So she finds the point where she can just manage to connect her core inwards, and she's working just underneath the limit before she starts to brace out and bear down. So she builds that strength just at that edge of her capabilities. But never going beyond it, because one of the things I'm really keen on is actually in the postnatal period, you need to be so careful with your energy and with that time that it takes to rehabilitate. And there seems to be a lot of focus on, getting your body back. And I just don't really like that, because I feel like, the whole experience of giving birth is so much bigger than whether you can fit into your pre-pregnancy genes. Like, that just seems irrelevant. I think that the value in doing sort of rehabilitative type of work is for the long-term health of your body and keeping you continent and keeping you out of pain and ensuring that any diastasis that you had heals well, so that you're strong enough to play with your child and run around in the park and lift them up onto the monkey bars without leaking or without giving yourself a back injury or
which really impacts on confidence to be out in the world if you have those kind of problems that are hidden and, like you said, might be some embarrassment about. So it's long-term confidence. It sounds like growing into your new body and your new role rather than trying to get the old back, which it sets you up for suffering in a way, because you've changed both emotionally and physically. And so growing into this new body and working with that new body to make it strong, which is what it sounds how you're describing it to me, it just feels so much better when I hear it spoken like that, because it's like, oh, we have this new body and it can be strong again, and possibly for some women stronger than it was before, because of the challenges they've gone through and finding a new way to work with their body. So I know I've had weak core muscles for a long time, but I think I in some ways had them previously to becoming pregnant for different reasons. So then working in that area is going to be so beneficial. But I'd like to backtrack a little bit, because I think we didn't really define Pilates, for example, at the beginning. And I know a little bit, I've done a little bit of it, but maybe some people who don't really know what it is, what is Pilates anyway? So would you give a very quick definition of what Pilates is and how it's different from just, say, a standard exercise class? I think people have got an idea how it's different already, but if there was any to add to that.
Well, it's It's an exercise system or a movement system that is basically based around balancing the body. The idea being that you use the right amount of effort at the right amount of time for whatever it is that you're doing. So you don't need to overexert yourself to do a particular exercise, but you need to create an amount of tone and tension to create the movement. But it's also based around posture and alignment. And there's like a set of key principles that we work with, which are breathing, alignment, so how your skeleton aligns and stacks up, centering, which is the ability for your pelvic floor and your deep abdominals to engage, and then there's some other things like how you control the movement and how you flow the movement, and also then the focus and the concentration. So a lot of people that I work with will always comment how much they have to think in a Pilates class. So it's and what I love about it is that for me it does create a sense of mind-body connection or harmony between my mind and my body, and a lot of that is in the way a particular Pilates teacher will teach. So like anything, you might go to a Pilates class at a particular studio and it'll be more focused on fitness and doing like high numbers of reps and high intensity, or you might go to a different Pilates studio and be focused more around this sort of rehabilitative focus, which is what I really love, which is really rebuilding the body from the inside out. So getting the sort of core structure functional, and then weaving in the different movement patterns to layer in the different muscle connections over time, so that you create this idea of using the right amount of effort at the right time in the muscles.
I
That makes
really
sense?
love that. Yeah, and I really love that, and I love that approach that you've described from the inside out, which is what I do with the like the imprinting and re-imprinting. It's like the inside out, your inner world reflected in your outer world, and you're doing that in the body, the actual physical body is and how that links to your mind, to your energy, to the outside world, just from a different focus. So it's kind of like the same approach using slightly different tools. And the body itself, I think, I work in a slightly different area most of the time, but the body needs that attention and in that way to support it with what its actual functions, bodily functions are. So I really love that approach. It's really great. And you also work with, we've talked a lot initially about postnatal. If we go backtracking again to the preparing for pregnancy, like you said, prevention, and many of us wandering around with bad habits of overexerting in one way before we're even pregnant. And then I think when you're pregnant and the muscles change, the hormones change, different things happen in your body, and we're tired, again, we can overdo things. And I think it's a really wonderful time to do something like your Pilates class to prepare. And so I'd love if you could talk a bit about how you support women, how your classes support women to prepare for birth.
Well, one of the things that I don't do is like high intensity, or I don't subscribe to the no pain, no gain philosophy of going harder, faster, and stronger. I mean, I don't subscribe to that in my life anyway, but particularly not in the prenatal or the postnatal classes. And I have to explain that in the prenatal classes, because often mums are coming from, quite intense exercise sort of workouts or habits that they will do. And so coming into the prenatal class can feel a bit frustrating for them. It's not that I don't ask them to work strongly with their bodies. It's just that I take a really specific focus in terms of, like, number one, helping their body to prepare for giving birth, and also keeping their body safe during the pregnancy to help them prevent those things I talked about earlier. So is there a possibility that they could keep their body safe and prevent prolapse or a diastasis that doesn't heal very well after, or incontinence? Because those, like particularly incontinence and or leaking and prolapse, are really prevalent in the postnatal population. And I don't think women, before they've had children, they don't really realize that until afterwards. And suddenly there's this whole world of pelvic health. But if they could have, I feel like if they could have some introduction into that in the prenatal period about actually how, like you say, taking a less of a driving your body hard to get fit and improve it approach, and more of a how can I care for my body and love my body and nurture my body approach, then perhaps that might shift some of the complications or conditions that show up in the postpartum period. Does that make sense?
I love that. I absolutely love that statement of the care and love and nurture your body, not push to improve it, because the push to improve your body really says a lot about how we see ourselves as women, how we see our bodies, how society treats our bodies. And so in your class, it may look like a simple preparing for birth, but actually what you're getting is a really revolutionary paradigm shift of loving, nurturing the female body as it changes in all its forms, and that will pass on into as you become a mother, nurturing and loving you as the mother at the center of your family. So I really, really love that approach. If that approach was in all classes, whatever the modality, that would be wonderful, so that we can really shift, because I feel it's so pervasive in society that we don't do that. Like you said, the improve it, be better, try and strive to keep up mentality is just there, and when we stop and question it, it feels so much softer and nicer and stronger to love and nurture once we make a shift.
And I think, as you say, there's a really pervasive culture of, you know, women not really loving on their bodies because it doesn't look right, or it should be thinner or flatter, or you know, this, that, or the other. And you know, I just think the stage of pregnancy is incredible. Like, you know, women are growing whole entire humans in their body, and very often they're working full-time jobs and caring for other children, and you know, they're just carrying such a lot on their plate, and often very exhausted, and at the end of their tether anyway. So I feel like, you know, at least, you know, I can offer them some space where they can just be really gentle with themselves, but also very kind of specific in the way that they can strategically strengthen their body. So whilst they're being gentle, they're not necessarily, because you need to be strong to be a mum. Like, you're running around after your kids, you're lifting prams, you're holding two kids, one on each hand, and you're carrying groceries, you know, like you're carrying a backpack. Like, you need to be strong to be a mum. Some mums I know don't do a lot of exercise prenatally, but they've said, oh, I've never been as active as I am now that I'm a mother. You know, so actually it's not that I don't ask women to work their bodies in a way that helps them build strength, but we don't do it in a way that exhausts them or makes them feel inadequate or causes them injury. And, you know, the stuff that I teach in the postpartum work is pretty much the same as what I teach in the prenatal work, in terms of how to work with the pregnant core in a way that you build strength underneath that edge, so you're not going into pushing out into your abdominals, which can overstress or overstrain the midline diastasis, or bear down and strain the pelvic ligaments, which may lead towards prolapse. So it doesn't mean that you can't work strongly to build strength. It's just that you want to educate yourself and learn how your body works under the load of different movements, and how you can manage that load and strengthen in a really safe and smart way. Yeah,
that's really beautiful.
And the other thing I do in the prenatal stuff is really help women prepare their bodies for birth, because I feel like when I attended the prenatal classes when I was pregnant, they were often modified, exercises modified to make it safe for me to do. So, you know, I'd do a prenatal Pilates class or a prenatal yoga class, and sometimes I felt like, well, this is just the version of the normal exercise, but it's just because I can't lie on my tummy, so they're going to give me a different version, as opposed to what I like to do is really teach to the state of pregnancy and teach to the ultimate goal of giving birth. Like, I feel like if I'm not addressing that in a Pilates class, I'm really doing a disservice to the women that are in there, because I certainly wouldn't train someone who's a cyclist without taking into account that they're going to spend a lot of time cycling, like.
You wouldn't train them as a runner, it's different muscles, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So I would train them differently, or even if I'm training someone who works at a desk, I train them differently to someone who works as a waiter. So I feel like the pregnant body really needs very specific things, and they're quite different to what you might teach in a conventional Pilates class. So I've done training in have you come across the spinning babies?
Yeah.
So I've done a workshop in spinning babies, and I've done training with optimal maternal positioning, and also there's these beautiful midwives here in Australia, Jenny Blythe and Fiona Hallinan, and they run this beautiful workshop that's all about can't remember the title of it, but it's about creating space in the pelvis to help baby to wiggle through. So I feel like there's a lot of knowledge in the birth world around helping baby pass through the pelvis. And I guess I feel like, because I often see women from very, very early in the pregnancy, or maybe I'm teaching them before they're pregnant, so they see me all the way through, and I see them every single week very often. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to help them learn how to balance their body, so that their uterus can align well and their baby can align well, learn how to release their pelvic floor so that they're not pushing against a tight pelvic floor, learn how to release and relax their body so they can surrender to birth. And I guess I feel like I didn't know this stuff when I had my home birth, and whilst I had set myself up as best as I could for having the most beautiful birth experience I could, I didn't really know how to release and relax and let go. I thought I had to be strong to give birth. And what I learned afterwards from some really amazing doulas was actually you need to be able to relax to give birth.
It's a different kind of strong, isn't it? It's not the strong of bracing against the world, it's the strong of being open and relaxing. It's a different kind of strength. It's not a weak strength. What kind of transformation do you see in the women that attend your classes right through?
Mostly it's the ability to work with their body rather than against their body. So that ability to tune in and be kind to their body, and they seem to learn how to, that's the best way I can describe it. It's like they're with their body instead of trying to make it something else or trying to get it to do something else or make it better. They're able to activate it and be strong, but they're able to really release and soften and let go as well. So it's that capacity I see change, that they're able to, I guess, engage and release, rather than just, often women hold a lot of tension. So, and that, whether that's mental or emotional, but it comes out in the body. So often that ability to hold charge and then release it and let go.
Because when we hold on like that, we're preventing the body from doing its job, which it knows very well how to do. It's a physiological function, the pregnancy and birth, and the body could just get on with it. And like you said, that ability to release and work with the body, all in our world. Beautiful. Is there any kind of final tip or word that you would say to anyone who's looking to prepare for birth? Because you said so many things, I don't know. There's some wonderful things in there. I'll put them on the bottom. But
sorry, what was the question again?
Sorry, yeah. I went off on one thinking, oh, look at all the wonderful things you've said. And my mind was off on. Do you have any, like a top tip or a final word that you'd love a woman listening to take home from this interview?
Oh, yes. I think my biggest tip would be to learn to relax. And I think I really think that learning to relax is important because it affects your whole body. You can learn to relax your pelvic floor, but it affects your physiology, your nervous system, your mental health, your emotional health. And, I think a lot in our culture, we're sort of wired, sort of in that hypervigilant, sort of slightly stressed state. And I think learning to relax and drop out of that is really crucial for birth, physically, mentally, and emotionally as well.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds so simple. It is simple, and yet it's a real skill to learn that.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you try and do it, I know sometimes when I've been in that hypervigilant state, you mentioned, you go, okay, just relax. Come on, relax. And it's not always as straightforward. You go, I'm relaxed. My body might be floppy, but I'm not actually relaxed. Because you can still hold on to tension in place. So it's a wonderful skill to learn. I think your classes, I wish I was in Australia sometimes. I'd love to go to your classes.
I'd love to have you.
When I heard you talking about them in the other forum, when I heard you talking about your approach and how it's different from get your body back, get your fitness back, and I love that approach. And I think that you're doing a lot of wonderful work with the women that come through, and the women that will listen to this interview might be inspired to find some different approaches and feel confident about giving birth. So thank you for taking the time. Do you have anything else you'd like to add at all to help women feel inspired as they go to give birth, become a mother?
It's a hard one to articulate, but I feel like another really important thing is learning to trust yourself and learning to speak up for yourself. Because I think in birth, there's a lot of people that know a lot about, or think they know a lot about your body and say they know what you need. And I think it's a really hard thing for a lot of women to do, to be able to actually tune in with what their needs, wishes and desires and dreams are, and not just tune in with them, but actually be able to articulate them and advocate for what it is that they want.
Important. The two together, relax and trust and speak up. Wonderful. So thank you so much for your time this morning, or this evening for you. It's been a really great interview, and I will pull out some of your wisdom underneath some notes for everyone to really take to heart. So thank you. And
thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice chatting.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. So